And the idea behind navigating the rivers of cash is some business leaders make strategy in developing businesses look easy. And I was like, well, what is it they do that we mere mortals don't? And trying to break the game down. So I came up with this concept. One of the things that I noticed is that many of them appear not to work that hard at it. And so I started looking at stuff like flow. You know that moment when you move into your unconscious and everything looks really easy and things just start coming your way? That's flow. So I came up with the idea that navigating the rivers of cash, the business sector you're in is a river. And the river flows and you have eddies and white water. We've got a bit of white water at the IoD at the moment. It happens. It's not a problem. But the more you anticipate that white water, the more you can see the eddies, those points when you stop and think. The more you see further ahead down the river, the more you see where your market is flowing, the more likely we are to be able to run successful companies as leaders. So I wrote this book called Navigating the Rivers of Cash, which has been published. I sent it to Kogan Page, big London and Indian, New York publisher, and they said, this is great, but it's a bit hippie. We don't want to publish it. But can you write this book? And I went, well, I'm not really an author. I'm a professional advisor. I've learned through actually helping people and doing a job. I'm a practical guy, doing this for fun, the author bit. And they said, no, you can write this book. And I said, I don't think so. Anyway, my marketing team said, no, you are writing it. And so off we went. The reason I was really hesitant is they wanted to call it competitive advantage. Now, has anyone got an MBA in the room? Anyone done all that stuff? No? Any practical people with MBAs? Michael Porter in the 80s wrote a book called Competitive Advantage, which is a really famous business models book, probably still very applicable today, but I just felt very uncomfortable going in with that title. But nonetheless, I wanted to write it. One of the other premises behind the book, they wanted this dynamic market. So they were talking about this idea that we are in a much faster pace of change today. And I think the problem, anyone feeling, calm, relaxed, not attacked in any way, your market's not moving that much, yeah. Markets are pretty dynamic, aren't they? And that pace of change, I think, has accelerated. Why? Well, I went away and looked at it, and human civilization, it turns out, is about 13,000 years old. Homo sapien, about 1 million, but 200,000 as we came out of Africa. 13,000 years old, this urban experiment. Sumerians, the wheel, 3,500 BC, roughly. I like that one because it tells you that ideas are valuable. When they went over the Siberian Straits, they didn't take the wheel, which is a bit inconvenient to the Aztecs. But the reason I share that is knowledge share. 1439, Gutenberg, printing press. Knowledge share starts to accelerate, and then Tim Berners-Lee in 1989, hypertext, World Wide Web, bang, ideas instantaneous. It has to be, in my book, the reason why we're facing accelerated change. It's not just a digital transformation. Digital transformation is where, of course, we've got these blurred lines, these converging sectors, different ways of doing business, this whole retail to online. It's much, much bigger than that. It's the speed of ideas and the ability to share ideas. And that is creating what I've decided to call the flux. And the flux basically means that companies are having to reinvent themselves much faster. It is quite possible. Who's a corporate, who's an entrepreneur in the room? Just a bit of a feel for the audience. So, who's a corporate? Okay, and who's entrepreneurs? So more entrepreneurs than corporates at the moment, that's good. Okay, fine. It is quite possible that the business you start as an entrepreneur will be wholly different by the time you leave it. The business model will change in a 10 to 15 year cycle. And all the studies suggest that the cycles have reduced. And we can look at this from the FTSE 100, the last company still in there that were in there 50 years ago is Tate & Lyle. Everything else is different. So business models are changing faster and companies are changing faster. So you have to reinvent that business model. Okay, and I call it the flux. The other thing that's going on in the flux is we've got slow growth in the Western economy, which is making margins tighter. There's too many companies. The other big driver in the flux, which is classic, is 19 billion in 1900, 1950, 2.2 billion, Now we've got a population of 7.8 billion. So we've got a massive population growth in the world as well, going on with this whole civilization experiment and this pace of accelerated change. So, it makes sense that capitalism is going to move on. It makes sense that businesses will change more rapidly. So we as leaders have to change the way we do things. And competitive advantage is about trying to put strategy back in the boardroom, because what I noticed is people going, well, actually, if things are moving so rapidly, all the plans that we're coming up with are out of date before we've implemented them. So what's the point in all this strategy stuff? Let's go for agility. That's surely where the money is. And I don't agree with that. I don't think that is right. So I wanted to try and put strategy back into the boardroom. Now, to do that, you have to define strategy, and you have to look at the metrics as leaders of what strategy is. Any takers in the room on what strategy is? It's quite a tricky one, strategy. When you really stop and look at the word, what does it actually mean? Any takers in the room? Definition of strategy? I'm going to have to do it, aren't I? Okay. I came up with a simple one, actually. I liken it to chess. Business plans tend to be one move ahead. Strategy tends to be thinking about 4 moves ahead. And it's also taking all the dynamic components and joining them up. So when we look at our businesses, it's the business model, our routes to market, the distribution. So it's the whole piece and trying to join them up, but also thinking 4 moves ahead. And if you are thinking 4 moves ahead and your competitors are only thinking 2 moves ahead, you are more likely to win. And that's one of the premises. So we need to think further ahead. We need to be more dynamic as leaders ourselves in the way we see our business model. We need to disrupt ourselves. I'll talk about that in a minute. Because we've got these blurred lines, we've got global mindset, we've got faster pace of change, we've got accelerating population, we've got much more knowledge share, so markets by nature are disruptive. But when we do that, and again, so we've got some corporates in the room, you've got some very established businesses. One of the hardest things, of course, is to get people to change. Getting people to stop and to look at the business model and go, we need to make a change, is one of the hardest things. And one of the things I worked out when I was looking at it and went out and talked to lots of my clients, we did lots of research, we read lots of books, is this little thing here, the vested interest of the status quo. Basically, as leaders, we employ people to create reliable results day to day. Because you don't want to go into chaos tomorrow, do you? You want profit. You need profit. You need your business to be generating that margin every day. So we employ people that create reliability and reliable results. And many of these, and use the definition of manager, they don't understand disruption. And they are perhaps more conservative by nature. And therefore, when we go in and say, actually, guys, we've taken a long, hard look at our market, and I'll talk to you a little bit about how we might do that in a second, and say we need to change because we can see the market's moving away from us, we hit a brick wall. And that is a problem. So we need to, as leaders, look at this disruption point, work out how we can internally bring that into our business in a positive way, and communicate with the management and teams around us who by nature are more conservative about how we break through and create change. And we've got a chance then. So for me, if you remember that idea, navigating the rivers of cash, creating competitive advantage, what we're looking to do is design businesses that are not also run. They're ahead of the competition. They create pull, not push. People want to deal with them as opposed to you having to go out and persuade them. Okay? So you get companies where people are going, we need to buy your product, we're going to come to you, as opposed to the other way around. Yeah. Dyson's done that beautifully, by the way, hasn't he? I mean, great example of it. So like Dyson, and I'm really hoping his electric car will do the same because he's got the brand to do it. So that's pull, not push. But if you're going to do that, what you've got to do is take more time, looking further ahead in the river, to work out where your market is going. And I call that leadership, not management. Have any of you ever read E-Myth by Richard Gerber? Yeah, it's a very famous book, used by a lot of business coaches. And the idea is very simply, work on your business, not in it. The idea is if you're a chef in a restaurant and you're cooking, you're working in it, whereas if you're designing a restaurant, you're designing the restaurant experience, you're working on it. So I think he's right. I think E-Myth is a good book. And I think he's right. Set your business up as a system, a process, and then you can work on it, not in it, and you will get better results. But I also think what he misses is that a lot of entrepreneurs can't do that. They're very control-orientated, and they actually don't like the idea of taking time out, because strategy is all about that blue ocean of free space and flow. And of course, it's really uncomfortable because it does not feel busy. Okay? So what I thought is, well, let's get practical again. You know, we work with a lot of entrepreneurs, we work with a lot of corporates. How do we get people to move away from management to leadership so that they can design their business, they can look at their business model better, and they can understand more where their markets are going? And so we said, well, look, actually, these are the low-value areas. If you get caught in the dashboard in finance, HR, premises, you're not going to grow that business. You're not going to add value. Operations, of course, need to work, but ultimately you want to delegate it. So yes, of course, you need highly efficient sales processes, but you need a good sales manager for that eventually. And where the added value eventually comes is in this area, the leadership space, and we define that as new products, strategic alliances, acquisitions, and or possibly research for new territories. So that is where you get the most growth in marketplaces. So again, using that analogy, if we look further down the river and we can see where the flow of our market's going to go, then what new products, acquisitions, strategic alliances or new territories do you need to create advantage in the future? Okay? And if you are too hands-on here as opposed to hands-off, how the hell are you going to figure that out? Okay? I have a little theory at the moment with Brexit and compliance and what's the other, GDPR, do you like that one? Oh, yeah, love that one. This working on, not in the business, your business today is sucking you more to work in it than it ever has done before. I have a little theory. I think we're firefighting more than we ever have done, and I think that's a real problem, and we need to work on it, and we need to be aware of it. I think we are aware we need to be working on the businesses, but it's become harder because there's a downward pull. But in the end, as leaders, we have a responsibility to look upwards. And to me, that's about where is our market going, how can we gain advantage in the future. So then came up with this idea that what actually we need to do is look at the line of probabilities in our sectors. So this is a bit of future visioning, if you like, because actually, you know, it's a problem, isn't it? If markets are moving more rapidly, how the hell do we work out where we're likely to be? Well, as I say, one of those points is a bit of free space, a bit of time to think. We're doing that this morning, so that's good. Then we can actually anticipate better. But the other is research. If you're hands-on all the time, how are we doing that research? So, you know, one great question for leaders is, when was the last time you really stopped and spent no more than a week doing nothing but looking at your competitors' websites in absolute detail? Absolute detail. Okay, because you've got your preconceptions of what they're up to. You think you're better than them, but actually what are they truly up to? A week doing nothing but that. That is macro research. The other area of macro research is looking at your parallel sectors. So the line of probability is, it is possible to forecast to an extent the future if you try and map out where your sector is likely to go. To do that, we have to look at the timeline of what's happened in the past as well. So you can actually do a drawing and start going, well, actually this happened, that happened. I did the line of probability when I talked about human civilization and stuff growing and speed of change and knowledge. So you can, if you look at the past, start looking at where the future is likely to be. If you look at the macro picture, which is really analysing your marketplace, but also comparable sectors. You know, there's no point in being a hotel business today without looking at what's happening in the apartment business, without looking at what's happening in Airbnb. You know, these are your threats, not just the other hotel competitors. So you have to look broader than your sector. And remember I said blurred lines, converging sectors, of course, that is the beauty of digital. It has completely blurred the lines of sectors. If we look at the ITC space, IT, telecoms, copiers, management consultancy, business transformation, it's all one big blurred line. It used to be separate sectors. Okay? The other thing we need to look for is the micro picture. So we're going to research more. And the micro picture is, if you can get your GDPR right, it's looking at your CRM. What's the age profile of your customers? Are they buying more, buying less, living longer? All of that big data that your company's got that tells you what the trends are likely to be. Okay? Now, a great example of a micro strategy, Tesco's managed to save 100 million once on their buying strategy, and a sustainable ongoing saving by getting better at predictive analytics on forecasting the weather for barbecue sales, and food around barbecue sales. So you can do some funky stuff with the micro picture. But if you fuse the two together, then we're likely to get a picture of where our market's going, okay? And then we can do some strategy stuff. And the strategy stuff is taking your core senior team out and kicking it about a bit, okay, objectively. This is the Michael Porter models. I have to put it up there because he had the original book. I'm a disciple of it. It's a good book. And he basically broke businesses down into 4 different business models. I think it's important. Cost leadership, so that's Skoda, Walmart. Differentiation, that's just doing things in a very different way. I would argue that Tesla had that for a little while. Other people catching up now. Products, and then operations business. Tesco's is a classic example of a good operations business, and banks typically operations business. So being clear what your business model is, and then dissecting it on a strategic basis with your team. And for me, that's about focus as well. So one of the things I hate is when I go out and I see a company and I go, you're the same as everybody else. You haven't taken the time to design a business model, a brand, and a pool, as far as the customers are concerned, ahead of everybody else. And that is a real problem. I mean, it's a problem for us if we come to sell a business or help people buy companies because they're very difficult to value and, where they're going. But the other reason it's a problem is because customers are confused. Customers are confused. So one of the big areas you can gain traction with from a strategic point of view is around this point of focus. And that is simply, we anticipate where the market is going to go, and then we choose the bridgehead where we truly focus on in that sector, and then we can create breakthrough moments. Okay? There's too many people try and do too many things badly. They're spread across too many areas. There's this old rule, 80-20 rule, but also it combines the concept of lose in order to gain. Lose in order to gain. That's stuff like saying no to some customers. Those customers that take up all your time? Yeah? That sort of thing. So we look at the business model. We look at where the market's likely to go. We look at that macro and micro picture. We fuse those elements together, and we can start bringing some strategic plays back into our business on a systematic basis. We can only do that if we've got more free time, and as a consequence, we need to move to leadership rather than management. And that, of course, causes another problem, which is this one. Do you remember I mentioned this vested interest of the status quo, those managers that don't like change? We have got to go hands-on to start with to change that second-tier management, our loyal lieutenants, and teach them about agility. Because it's not their natural state, they don't necessarily enjoy it, and they're not, therefore, that adaptive. So you work on the overall big picture design, and you get your second tier to do the more innovative, smaller change initiatives within the organization. Not just manage the status quo, but managing a form of agility. So when I go in and see a lot of companies, one of the first questions I ask them is, what's your training budget for the second tier management? Now, corporates aren't too bad at this historically, but SMEs are appalling. They don't have a training budget. There is no training budget. So you've got all these self-grown people that have promoted themselves to their highest level of competence, and they're not being trained. And they certainly don't get the concept of agility. Agility is adapting to the environment as it moves around you. It's an evolutionary point. It's a Darwin point, isn't it? It's not the strongest of the species survive. It's those most responsive to change. And if we're going to change our organizations and create truly purposeful organizations ahead of the competition, which create pooling customers, we have to get the second tier doing those smaller, agile areas so that we can get off and do the big picture of where we can truly drive those businesses. So it's not just the vision and mission stuff, it's more than that. It's how we can win. So you've got to do training, you've got to talk to the second tier, and it's a purposeful conversation with them. Okay? And it's all about core competency. But we actually, again, we see this a lot more in entrepreneurial businesses rather than corporates. But we have a model when we're working with people on the strategy side, which is taking a business that's cultural to commercial. So with the more entrepreneurial business, so typically a business with less than 100 people or less than 50 people is more cultural. It's a village, okay? Everybody's helping each other. They're all supporting each other's deficiencies. There are probably very little roles and responsibilities written down. If they are written down, they haven't been looked at for 2 or 3 years, okay? And if you're going to change a business and take it further ahead of competition, we have to get this right in the second tier. So what we want to try and do is design a more commercial business. And a more commercial business is much clearer roles and responsibilities. And with that, guys, comes accountability. So your second tier have accountability. So if you're going into the office and you're answering the questions of people who are paid to answer those questions, you're undermining your business, right? The best thing you can do is design those roles and responsibilities and put accountability on for those people. Now, obviously, we have to track it. Okay, so I went through this myself once as a young entrepreneur. I gave one of my office managers a book on how to delegate. I followed it up. I was tracking it. I said, how did you get on with that book, Adrian? He said, great. I gave it to the team to read. And at which point, I didn't quite know what to say because he had a point. but the real truth of the story was I still didn't follow it through. Okay? So I took the joke, didn't know what to do with it, went off. Unforgivable, because I did not hold him accountable for how he was delegating to his team and whether he was actually breaking it down properly. So roles and responsibility become really key, because one of the dangers is if we go, wow, this is a dynamic market, we need to change our business model, we rush off and do all this research, start getting all these great ideas of where we can go with it, take our hands off the tiller, and your second tier aren't quite driving the business in the way you want. So, and that can be a problem. We meet people that are doing that. They've understood they need to be working on the business, not in it, but they haven't got the engine beneath them operating effectively from an evolution perspective. So we call that cultural to commercial. This is a village, everyone helps each other. Commercial is the ultimate of Jack Welch's book, 360-degree appraisals, bottom 10% out, can't do the job, you're fired. Obviously, we don't want to be there either. We want to be somewhere in between, but you have to go somewhere over here if you're going to drive those levels of change, viewpoint to the book. So in the end, creating competitive advantage. I am going to take some questions shortly as well, so we can do a bit of, because it's a small group, a bit of a chat. Creating competitive advantage in dynamic markets. If markets are moving more rapidly, we have to stop and look at what we're doing in terms of where we are spending our time. The added value of where you spend your time are in these 4 areas: new products, strategic alliances, acquisitions, territories. Anything else should be trying to delegate and creating a team-driven environment. That way we can create added value. And some of the fastest growing businesses we do, they don't necessarily do big ones, they just buy an acquisition where they go, right, that's a new product, we really need that, bolt it on, new team, new way of thinking, to try and create those changes within the business. We do need to talk about shareholder value as well. The shareholder value, and this is mainly because of our professional practice, I have to talk about this because obviously we do deals and it's still the core part of our business, although we have the strategy practice. when we're looking at the business model, when we're looking at competitive advantage, we do need to also consider how we create more valuable businesses. And of course, the best way you can do that is recurring revenue streams. So if we are selling a business, for example, if it's a contracting business, it is less valuable than one that is a contract business. So you want to have contracts with recurring revenue, you want forecastability. So it's important not just to look at what is the most profitable business play, we do also need to consider how we're managing the shareholder value, okay? Because that's probably, from an entrepreneur point of view, the bigger wealth area. Corporates manage it as well, but they're public, so it's a different way of thinking in terms of they're managing it daily in terms of their PR, etc. Whereas for entrepreneurs, actually some of the biggest wealth is created out of doing deals, isn't it? So if we look at Richard Branson, it's not always been profit for him, it's actually been deal. That's where his money come from. So we need to bear that in mind when we're designing our businesses. So a very simple question again, when you go into a boardroom meeting, and how often do we have those? And how often are they management meetings, as opposed to boardroom meetings, different discussion? Do we also go in and go, instead of how do we make more profit tomorrow, how do we increase shareholder value on a sustainable basis? Okay, and recurring revenue is probably at the heart of that discussion. Sustainability of income, forecastability of income. So a classic example of this, break it down. We were working with we sold it actually for about 5 million, it wasn't a big deal. Team of surveyors, quite successful, lots of one-off sales, but it had this quite fast-growing little lettings business, and we got them to concentrate on that. And of course, the multiples behind letting was far higher than the multiples from a surveyor business. So that's how we got them 5 million, not two, which is probably what they were worth when it comes to sell it. But it's actually getting the board to recognise what the value drivers in the business are. And when I say the board, I do, it's a big point. If we can get into this leadership space, how often do we sit down and do this creative business design stuff and ask ourselves the question, where are we going? Most board meetings that we meet are management meetings, okay? A management meeting is a simple one. Sorry, is anyone called Fred in the room? Okay, I can get away with this one. Okay, fine. So, management meeting is Fred any good at his job? Now, you've been asking that for 5 years, so you probably already know the answer to it, if you're really honest, okay? Those are management meetings. A board meeting is, what are our competition doing? Where is our market going? What is the strategy further ahead? How can we gain competitive advantage ahead of our competitors? Those sorts of areas. Of course, we've got corporate governance. We need to bear that in mind. But we need to create strategic time for those board meetings. And actually, if you look at it, how often do you as a team really sit down and answer and ask those questions? Because more often than not, we're firefighting. More often than not, they're operational meetings. More often than not, they're in the management space. And I'm not talking about that annual strategy meeting you have once a year where you all go off to the hotel and you get drunk and it's a great day and nobody can ever remember quite what the strategy was. I'm talking about, mind you, did you see that the AA guy? They went off on a strategy day and he got fired, didn't he? Because he punched his, he got so angry. I suggest they don't meet often enough. So the reason I'm sharing that is I just don't think we design this in our businesses effectively. So you as a leader need to do that research and development of where it's going and then design the space and time for you and your core team to work out how you can gain that advantage. So, summary, talk more to your team about how they can do the small team-driven agility stuff, the more small team-driven changes. I was in a meeting about GDPR the other day and I said, hang on a minute, what the hell am I doing in this room? I have a marketing director and I have a management meeting. You are employed to do this. I don't need to know about GDPR. My job is, as we've done recently actually, is to set up the corporate finance division and work out how we make money out of doing more fundraising and private equity. Okay? Not, that's a new product, not how GDPR works. I can do a little bit, but I'm not getting caught in it. So move to leadership from management. Create the time to think further ahead, then relax. Look at what the competition are doing, macro and micro picture, get your data, get your dashboard, get the intelligence, and now we can start playing with that, creating ideas and scenarios around where we can gain best advantage. You will have to make a decision at some point of where that focus needs to be. Okay? Now, actually, we're doing okay here, but if we go over here, we are going to be really better. Okay? There's a risk to that, so you've got to understand the risk profile of everything. Be decisive, communicate it effectively. Problem. Leading the adaptive organisation and communicating. Do you remember when I said vested interest to the status quo? What happens when you've taken your time in the wilderness to design a better business model and thought about where it's going and you're further ahead of the marketplace than other people can see, and you go, right, we don't need to do it this way, we want to do it this way. What happens? What does everyone do to you when you start communicating it? They look at you as you go on.
I got described as forceful and too driven.
Yeah. They just don't. Yeah. Do you know what? I can imagine the conversation when IBM were looking at Microsoft and all the licensing, and they dropped the ball because they said, do you know what? Mainframes are the future. And they didn't do the software side of it. And they let Mr. Bill Gates have it. I can imagine the conversation. There was probably someone in that room, I wasn't there, going, oh, there's something here. I've got a tingle moment with this software stuff. Maybe it is the future. And everyone went, nah, that's not what we do. And they lost it. So don't expect people to get it straight away. There will be a gap between where you are in your head and what your vision is for that organisation and where your management are. And that will be really, really frustrating for a while. So you've got to stay patient, you've got to keep communicating it, and you've got to share that vision, and you've got to find ways to break that gap down. And then, of course, there's all the practical stuff going to implement the change. Whether it's a more digital business model, but in the end, what we want is these standout businesses, which are more valuable, which are not also run, where customers are going, do you know what, we want to buy from you, we need to buy from you, rather than you having to persuade them. I also want to make a final point within that context, and this is this, line of probability. Capitalism is creaking a bit, if I'm honest, from my perspective, line of probability. It is no longer acceptable just to make money and be rich. Okay, that was my old definition of capitalism, by the way, you know. I was Thatcher's child. Yeah, all braces and Ferraris, you've got to make a load of money. We have to do so in a socially responsible way that is sustainable and that contributes to society. Okay, so we can't just say, how do we make more money? How do we increase the value of our businesses? We have to do so in a way that contributes to society. And again, if you do that, you'll create pull in the marketplace as opposed to push. So, bit of a whirlwind this morning. I hope I'm doing well against the Director General. I'm competing. I hope I'm competing. I'm trying to give some practical leadership ideas. I'm not talking about leadership from a gravitas point of view. I think those leaders are dead, by the way. Do you remember that macho leader? I'm all charm, I'm all charisma. It's all my idea. I'm talking about quiet, humble, listening, research, thinking it through leadership. Anybody who is intelligent can do this. You do not need to be a charismatic leader to do it. It's about quiet, thoughtful, intelligent research, and it's actually more listening than it is talking, which I find really difficult. I've got a team member in here, she's nodding, yeah, she understands that. Where is your market going? What conversations are you avoiding having? And by the way, those are internal conversations with yourself. I've had to go through one recently. And you know, this Brexit stuff's all really difficult, isn't it? It's like, oh, God, you know, we're just sorting ourselves out of 2008, 2009, and now somebody's put the brakes on the economy again. I don't know what to say. So, have we got to change the business model again? Yes, probably. Even though we went for a massive change ourselves as a practice in 2008, 2009, we're doing it again now because we think the world is changing around us and we've got to change. So one of the conversations I had is, have I got the energy for this? Really? This is my third fairly big transition as a businessman. And can I go back out to the team and say, oh, we need to do this differently yet again, and get them to listen? And were we avoiding the conversation? Probably, when it first came up. So I think we see Brexit as creating drag, which is forcing people to look down, not at. But in the end, if we get this right, we should create a better global marketplace. If we get it right, the exit right. They'll fudge it, by the way, I suspect. But it means we've got a bit of drag going on in our businesses, which is making it harder to keep the energy in this game. The other conversations that we avoid is the bits that are working well in the business will be the bits that you enjoy. The bits that are working badly will be the bits that you don't enjoy. And being honest with yourself in that conversation. Okay? And then we're back to that leadership, new products, strategic alliances, acquisitions, where the true higher value businesses are driven, combined with shareholder value, and with that one fundamental, very, very simple marketing question and customer question and business model question, which is really important. In the end, why is your organization better? Okay? Truly better. Not good enough just to say, well, it's our people and our product. Why is it truly better than the competition? And if it's not, you've got a problem. Thank you very much.